The space between words. Olivia Newton traced small circles on the condensation of her coffee mug, watching as James meticulously arranged his tools on the workbench. Sunday mornings had once been their time-lazy breakfasts and whispered conversations. Now they moved around each other like polite strangers, their 5th anniversary approaching with the quiet heaviness of unspoken words. "I was thinking we could drive to the coast next weekend," she ventured, her voice carrying a hopeful lilt. "Remember that little seafood place in Newport?" James didn't look up from the broken radio he was dismantling. "Can't. It's taking extra shifts. At the garage, the Sullivan account needs finishing by month end." Olivia's suggestion evaporated into the air between them. She'd expected this answer, had learned to brace herself for the gentle dismissals that characterized their relationship. These days, James wasn't cruel, never that. He was practical, focused, reliable. It's the steady heartbeat that had drawn her to him when they'd met at her brother's wedding. "Right, of course," she murmured, curling her fingers around the mug's warmth. "Maybe another time." She watched his hands, capable, strong as they carefully extracted the radio's inner components. He'd always been good at fixing broken things. Everything except what was fracturing between them. Later that evening, as rain tapped gently against their bedroom window, Olivia sorted through photographs for her upcoming exhibition. As a freelance photographer, she captured moments of raw emotion, the weathered faces of fishermen, children's unguarded laughter, lovers intertwined in unself-conscious embraces. "These are beautiful," James commented, genuinely impressed as he paused behind her. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, rare moment of connection that made her heart flutter traitorously.
"Thank you,"
she replied, leaning slightly into his touch. "The gallery owner thinks they might sell well." "Good," he nodded, then moved away toward the bathroom. "That'll help with the mortgage this month." The warmth of the moment cooled instantly. It's always the practical consideration, never the emotional one. That night, as James slept soundly beside her, Olivia stared at the ceiling, remembering when they'd first moved into this small craftsman house. How they'd made love on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by unpacked boxes. How James had whispered promises into her hair, his voice thick with emotion he rarely showed in daylight. The following Tuesday, during dinner with her closest friend Tessa, Olivia finally gave voice to her concerns. "I don't know how to reach him anymore," she confessed, pushing pasta around her plate. "It's like there's this glass wall. I can see him, but I can't touch him." Tessa's eyes softened with concern. "Have you tried talking to him directly about it?" Olivia laughed softly, without humor. "Every time I try, he says I'm overthinking, that I'm too sensitive." She blinked rapidly. "Last week I cried because he forgot our anniversary dinner, told me I was being manipulative. Oh, Liv, ... Tessa reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "The thing is," Olivia continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't think he means to hurt me. I think he just doesn't understand what it means to feel things deeply." That night, she attempted once more. Sitting on the edge of their bed, she told James how disconnected she felt, how lonely she was becoming in their relationship. His face hardened almost imperceptibly. "We have a good life, Olivia. Stable, secure. Not everything needs to be a dramatic." Seen from one of your photographs? A tear slipped down her cheek, and something in his expression shifted not to compassion, but to frustration. "This is exactly what I mean," he sighed, turning away. "I'm tired. Let's just go to sleep." As moonlight filtered through their curtains, Olivia felt the space between them, expanding into a vast, uncrossable distance. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the dull ache that had become her constant companion.
"Ow."
In the darkness, she wondered how long a heart could continue beating when it was slowly breaking apart. Muted symphonies, the summer heat pressed against the windows as Olivia sorted through the mail, her fingers pausing on a thick cream envelope. Inside was an invitation to showcase her photography at a prestigious gallery in Seattle, her biggest opportunity yet. Her heart raced as she read the details again, imagining her work displayed on those hallowed walls. When James returned from work, grease still embedded beneath his fingernails, despite his thorough scrubbing, Olivia could barely contain her excitement. James. The most incredible thing happened, she beamed, holding out the letter. The Westbrook Gallery wants to feature my work in their Emerging Artists exhibition. It's a 3-month installation. James skimmed the letter, nodding slowly. That's great, he said, handing it back. What's the compensation like? Olivia's smile faltered. It's not really about the money. This is the Westbrook, James. Photographers work for years hoping to get noticed by them. Sure, but we need to be practical. Will this cover the time you'll spend away from your regular clients? He moved toward the refrigerator. The conversation seemingly concluded in his mind. Something inside Olivia snapped. Can you just ... be happy for me, for once, without calculating the cost-benefit analysis? James turned, surprise etched across his features. I am happy for you. I'm just thinking ahead. No, you're dismissing what matters to me, Olivia replied, her voice trembling. This is my dream, and you're reducing it to a line item in our budget. You're overreacting. James sighed, his tone weary, as though dealing with a difficult child. I said congratulations, didn't I? Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. Words without feeling behind them are just noise. James, his jaw tightened. Not everyone needs to have an emotional breakdown to prove they care. Some of us just show it by working hard and keeping a roof over our heads. The barb struck deep. Olivia retreated to their bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photograph on the nightstand, James and her on their third date. His arm around her shoulders, a rare, carefree smile lighting his face. Where had that man gone? Or had she merely imagined? The depth of feeling behind his eyes. The following weeks brought a flurry of preparation for her exhibition. Olivia found herself staying late at her studio, partly from necessity and partly to avoid the chilling silence of home. One evening, as she was editing photos, her phone lit up with a call from her mother, Patricia. Sweetheart. Her mother's voice sounded strained. I've been to the doctor today. Something in her tone made Olivia's stomach knot. What is it, Mom? They found something during my mammogram there. They're saying it's stage 3 breast cancer. The world tilted on its axis. Olivia gripped the desk edge, her mother's voice continuing with medical details that blurred together. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, it's uncertain prognosis. I'll come home, Olivia said immediately. I'll be there tomorrow. After hanging up, she sat frozen, tears streaming silently down her face. The studio door opened, revealing James's surprise visit with takeout in hand. He took one look at her and set the food down. What happened? Through broken sobs, Olivia explained her mother's diagnosis. James listened, his expression somber but controlled. She's strong, he offered finally, and medicine has come a long way. I told her I'd go stay with her, Olivia said, wiping her eyes, at least through the surgery and initial treatments. James frowned. What about your exhibition? It's in 3 weeks. Olivia stared at him, disbelief flooding her system. My mother has cancer, James. The exhibition doesn't matter right now. I understand you're upset, he said carefully. But making rash decisions won't help anyone. Your career matters too. Your mother would say the same thing. How can you? Olivia's voice caught. How can you be so cold? This isn't about my career. It's about being there for someone I love. I'm not being cold. I'm being rational, James countered, frustration edging into his voice. Throwing away this opportunity won't cure your mother. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the warm evening. Not everything can be approached with detached logic. James, sometimes life just hurts, and we need to acknowledge that pain. Dwelling on the pain doesn't help, he insisted. Action plans do. Practical solutions. Like what? She challenged, anger rising through her grief. Hire a home health aide, arrange for meal deliveries, set up a schedule where you can work on your exhibition and visit on weekends. He listed these options as if reading from a manual on efficient crisis management. Olivia shook her head slowly, a terrible clarity washing over her. Do you even hear yourself? My mother might be dying, and you're suggesting I outsource her care so I can hang pictures on a wall. You're twisting my words, James said, his voice hardening. I'm trying to help you find balance. No, Olivia whispered. You're trying to make my emotions fit into your comfortable, controlled world. But they won't, James. They never will. She gathered her things, tears flowing freely now. James watched her, his expression a mixture of confusion and impatience. You need to pull yourself together, he said finally. Crying won't solve anything. Those words, delivered with such dismissive certainty, hung in the air between them. Perfect distillation of the gulf that had grown in their relationship. Olivia walked past him, her heart breaking not just for her mother, but for the love she'd once believed would last a lifetime, as she drove home through the rain-slicked streets. The wipers keeping time with her racing thoughts, Olivia realized. Something fundamental had shifted inside her. The exhibition, her photography. Even her relationship with James, everything had reconfigured in the harsh light of her mother's mortality. Some distances, once revealed, could never be crossed again. The final teardrop the hospital corridor seemed endless as Olivia walked beside the gurney, her mother's hand clasped tightly in hers. Patricia's skin had taken on the translucent quality of tissue paper, blue veins visible beneath the surface. Her once vibrant auburn hair, the same shade Olivia had inherited, had thinned from the first round of chemotherapy. You don't have to look so worried, sweetheart, Patricia murmured, attempting a smile. It's just a setback. But Olivia had been at the oncologist's office. Oh, she'd heard the grave tone when Dr. Ferris explained that the cancer had spread more aggressively than anticipated. This wasn't just a setback. It was a battle they were beginning to lose. I'm not worried, Olivia lied, squeezing her mother's hand. I'm just thinking about what flavor of ice cream to smuggle in after your procedure. Patricia's laugh turned into a cough. Mint chocolate chip, except no substitutes. For 3 weeks, Olivia had lived in her childhood home, converting the dining room into a makeshift studio so she could continue preparing for her exhibition remotely. Her mornings were spent accompanying her mother to treatments, afternoons working on her photographs, and evenings cooking meals that Patricia rarely had the appetite to eat. James called every few days, their conversations brief and superficial. He talked about the garage, neighborhood happenings, bills he'd paid, never asking detailed questions about Patricia's condition or how Olivia was coping with the emotional toll. It was as if acknowledging the gravity of the situation might invite unwelcome emotions into his carefully ordered existence. After her mother was settled in her hospital room, Olivia stepped into the hallway to call James. This latest development, emergency, surgery to address complications, felt too significant not to share. His phone went to voicemail twice, before he answered on the third attempt. Hey, he said, ambient garage noise in the background. I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back? Mom's condition has worsened, Olivia said without preamble, her voice steady, despite the fear constricting her chest. They've found more tumors. They're operating now to relieve pressure on her liver. A beat of silence. That's rough, James finally responded. What are the doctors saying? They're not making promises, Olivia whispered, tears threatening. James, I'm scared. Really scared. I don't know if she's going to make it through this. The background noise on his end diminished, suggesting he'd moved to a quieter location. Olivia felt a flicker of hope. Hopes he sensed the magnitude of the moment, the desperate need she had for emotional support. Listen, he said, his voice taking on the practical tone she'd come to dread. You've been running yourself ragged for weeks. Maybe this is the time to consider what we talked about, professional care. You've got the exhibition opening in 9 days. You need to focus on that. The hope extinguished. Are you serious right now? Olivia asked, disbelief coloring her words. My mother is fighting for her life. You being exhausted isn't helping her, James countered. I'm thinking of both of you. You're too emotionally invested to see the bigger picture. Too emotionally invested? She's my mother, Olivia's voice rose, drawing glances from a passing nurse. She lowered it again, stepping closer to the wall. The bigger picture is that someone I love might die, James. The exhibition doesn't matter compared to that. That's your emotion talking, he said firmly. Your mother worked hard to put you through photography school. She wouldn't want you to throw away this opportunity. Stop using my mother to justify your emotional detachment, Olivia hissed. For once in your life, can you just acknowledge that this hurts, that I'm in pain, that sometimes practical solutions aren't enough? Long pause followed. When James spoke again, his voice had that edge of condescension that had become increasingly familiar. When you've calmed down, you'll see I'm right. Crying over things you can't control is just wasting energy you could be using productively. Something crystallized in Olivia in that moment, a realization that had been forming for months, perhaps years. This wasn't a temporary disconnect or a rough patch, but this was who James was, fundamentally. A man who viewed emotions as inconvenient obstacles, rather than essential parts of the human experience. I have to go, she said quietly. The surgeon will be out soon. Keep me posted, James replied, already sounding distracted. And think about what I said. Olivia ended the call and leaned against the cool hospital wall, a profound exhaustion settling into her bones. She thought about the countless times she'd reached for emotional connection, only to have her hand close around empty air. The times her tears had been met with impatience rather than compassion. The slow erosion of her self-worth as she began to question the validity of her own feelings. The surgery lasted 5 hours. When Dr. Ferris emerged, his face told the story. Before his words could. They'd done everything possible, but Patricia's system was overwhelmed. It was now a matter of days, perhaps hours. That night, as Olivia maintained her vigil beside her mother's bed, she watched the gentle rise and fall of Patricia's chest and thought about the woman who had taught her to see beauty in the world's most ordinary moments, who had encouraged her artistic vision even when it meant financial sacrifice, who had never, not once, made her feel that her emotions were too much or too intense, in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. As monitors beeped a steady rhythm, Olivia made a decision. It's not from anger or spite, but from a place of clarity and self-preservation. She would no longer diminish herself to accommodate someone incapable of emotional reciprocity. When she returned to their home 2 weeks later after the funeral, after the exhibition opening she'd attended with red-rimmed eyes, after sorting through her mother's belongings with Tessa's steadfast support, the decision had only strengthened. James was at work when she arrived. Methodically, she packed her essentials, clothing, photography equipment, the journals her mother had kept throughout her life. She left behind the furniture, the appliances, the trappings of the practical life James had constructed. On the kitchen counter, she placed her house key and a handwritten note. James, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not for a day or a week, but permanently. I've realized that continuing this relationship means betraying something essential in myself. The capacity to feel deeply and express those feelings without shame. You've made it clear that you see my emotional nature as a flaw to be corrected rather than a core part of who I am. I've spent years trying to make myself smaller, quieter, more rational by your definition. I can't do it anymore. My mother's final gift to me was the reminder. Life is too precious to spend it apologizing for how deeply we feel. I deserve someone who will hold space for my tears, not dismiss them. Who will see my emotions as my strength, not my weakness. I hope one day you'll understand what was lost here. Not because I want you to suffer, but because that understanding might bring you closer to the emotional connection you've been running from your entire life. Take care of yourself. Olivia, she left without looking back, driving toward the coast, where her mother's sister, Eleanor, had offered her a temporary home. As the familiar landscape of their neighborhood receded in her rearview mirror, Olivia felt something unexpected bloom in her chest. Not just grief for what was ending, but a quiet hope for what might begin. Empty echoes. James Norton stood in the kitchen, reading Olivia's note for the third time, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. The house around him felt unnaturally quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. This is ridiculous, he muttered, setting the note down with more force than necessary. She was upset about her mother, understandably so. She needed space to process her grief. She would call tomorrow or the next day, once the initial wave of emotion had passed. But tomorrow came and went. Then a week. James called her cell phone repeatedly, each attempt routing directly to voicemail. He contacted Tessa, who answered with cool civility that Olivia was safe, but had no interest in speaking with him. When he pressed for her location, Tessa simply said she'll reach out if and when she wants to. 2 weeks after Olivia's departure, James stood in their bedroom, his bedroom now staring at the empty spaces she'd left behind. Half-vacant closet. The vanity cleared of her cosmetics and brushes. The bedside table missing her stack of dog-eared photography books. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, unexpected anger rising in his throat. How could she just leave? After 5 years together, after all he'd done to provide stability, security, a foundation for their future. It was irresponsible, impulsive, exactly the kind of emotion-driven decision he'd always cautioned her against. Yet beneath the anger lurked something else, something that felt uncomfortably like fear. The house wasn't just quiet, it was hollow, as if Olivia had taken not just her belongings, but some vital energy that had animated the space. The following Saturday, unable to bear the emptiness, James drove to their favorite hiking trailer. Moderate 5-mile loop they'd walked dozens of times. Halfway up the first incline, he stopped abruptly. Remembering how Olivia would always pause at this exact spot to photograph the valley below, how she'd once spent 20 minutes waiting for the light to shift just so, while he'd checked his watch repeatedly, calculating how the delay would impact their return time. "It's perfect now," she'd said finally, lowering her camera with satisfaction. "That moment won't ever exist exactly like this again." He'd nodded absently, already moving forward on the trail. Had he even looked at what she was seeing? Had he ever really stopped to see the world through her eyes? As summer faded into autumn, James maintained his routine with mechanical precision. Work, gym, home maintenance, occasional beers with colleagues. But the structure that had once felt like strength now seemed hollow, scaffolding without purpose. On a rain-soaked Tuesday in October, he found himself sitting in his truck outside the Westbrook Gallery. Olivia's exhibition had been extended. Due to popular demand, according to the local arts section, he'd started reading obsessively. For 20 minutes he sat there, debating whether to go inside, before finally gathering his courage. The gallery was nearly empty on the weekday afternoon. James moved slowly through the space until he found the room dedicated to Olivia's work. And there, captured in black and white and vivid color, was evidence of how profoundly he had failed to see her. Each photograph told a story of raw, human emotion, an elderly couple dancing in their kitchen, joy etched into the wrinkles of their faces, a father kneeling to comfort his crying child, strangers embracing at what appeared to be a memorial service, and most gutting of all, a self-portrait of Olivia, tears streaming unchecked down her face as she looked directly into the camera, unflinching in her vulnerability. The placard beside it read, "Unashamed, self-portrait in grief. Dedicated to my mother, Patricia Newton 196-02023, who taught me that tears are not weakness, but the physical manifestation of love's depth." James stood transfixed, a pressure building in his chest. He thought of all the times he'd seen Olivia cry from happiness, from sadness, from frustration, and how he'd interpreted those tears as manipulation or overreaction. How he'd made her feel ashamed of the very quality that made her work so powerful, her willingness to feel everything completely. Beautiful work, isn't it? James turned to find a gallery attendant beside him, a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "Yes," he managed. Do you know the artist?" "Not personally," the woman replied. But she gave a talk during the opening, spoke about how art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. She smiled. His photographs certainly accomplished that. After leaving the gallery, James drove aimlessly through the city streets, his mind replaying moments from their relationship through this new lens of understanding. Olivia crying when they'd found the perfect house, tears he'd dismissed as unnecessary dramatics. Olivia weeping during a film, which he'd teased her about for days afterward. Olivia's eyes welling up when he'd worked through their anniversary. Dinner, a reaction he'd called manipulative. Had he ever, even once, simply held her and acknowledged her feelings as valid? When he finally returned home, James did something unprecedented in his adult life. He called in sick to work. Then he sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and began to write, crossing out and rewriting, until the floor around him was littered with crumpled yellow paper. It was past midnight when he finally composed an email to the address listed. On the gallery website, "Olivia, I visited your exhibition today. Your work is extraordinary, honest in a way I never allowed myself to be. I've spent weeks telling myself you left because of grief, that you weren't thinking clearly. But standing in that gallery, seeing the world through your lens, I realized something you've always seen clearly. It was me who was blind. I dismissed your tears because they frightened me. Because feeling deeply meant risking pain, and I've spent my entire life constructing walls against that possibility. My father taught me that emotions were weakness. I learned that lesson too well. None of this excuses how I failed you, especially during your mother's illness. Not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. Just wanted you to know that your leaving forced me to face what I've been running from. For that, despite everything, I'm grateful. Be well. Be whole. You deserve nothing less." James sent it before he could reconsider, and sat in the silent kitchen, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Olivia had found at a flea market one of the few decorative items she'd left behind. For the first time in his adult life, James Norton allowed himself to cry, the tears coming slowly at first, then in heaving sobs that bent him double. They weren't tears of self-pity, but of mourning for the connection he'd squandered, for the emotional wasteland he'd created within himself, and for all the moments of beauty and depth he'd refused to experience because they couldn't be controlled or quantified. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor, James wiped his face and felt a strange, unfamiliar lightness. Not happiness, he was far from that, but perhaps the first fragile tendril of freedom from the constraints he'd placed on himself for so long. It was too late for Olivia, but perhaps not too late for him to learn how to truly live. Ripples of redemption. 18 months had transformed the coastal town of Seabrook into home for Olivia. Her cottage, perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, was small, but filled with light, the perfect space for her expanding photography business. After the success of her Westbrook exhibition, commissions had flowed steadily, allowing her to be selective about her projects. She set her mug of tea on the porch railing and breathed deeply, watching the morning fog retreat across the water. At 34, Olivia felt older in some ways, younger in others. Grief had aged her, carving new lines around her eyes and mouth. Yet there was also a lightness to her movements now, an absence of the perpetual tension that had accompanied her final years with James. The thought of him no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. She'd read his email, sent after his gallery visit, multiple times in those early days, had even drafted several responses, none of which she'd sent. What was there to say, really? His awakening, while genuine, had come too late for them. Some bridges once burned couldn't be rebuilt, nor should they be. Auntie Liv. Look what I found. 6-year-old Madeline came bounding up the porch steps, her small hands cupped around something precious. Eleanor's granddaughter had appointed herself Olivia's unofficial assistant, a role that involved collecting treasure and asking endless questions about photography. "Careful, sweetheart," Olivia cautioned, setting aside her reflections as she knelt to examine the child's discovery, a perfect sand dollar. "That's beautiful. Should we photograph it?" Adeline nodded solemnly. "For the memory wall." The memory wall was Olivia's ongoing project, a collection of photographs documenting small, beautiful moments that might otherwise be forgotten. It had begun as therapy after her mother's death, but had evolved into something more, a visual testament to the value of noticing, of being present, of honoring the emotional texture of everyday life. Later that afternoon, as Olivia prepared for a client meeting, her phone chimed with an email notification. The sender's name made her pause. James Norton. For a moment she considered ignoring it. Their last communication had been his message after visiting her exhibition nearly a year and a half ago. What could he possibly have to say now? Curiosity won out. She opened the email. "Olivia, I hope this message finds you well. I've started and deleted this email a dozen times, unsure if reaching out is the right thing to do. But an article about your recent work with the Grief Counseling Center appeared in the Seattle Times. and I wanted to say how moved I was by the project. Those photographs, particularly the series of children expressing their feelings about loss. Parents there doing important work in the world, the kind of work I once dismissed as indulgent emotionalism. I was wrong about so many things. I've been seeing a therapist for the past year. It sounds cliché to say it's changing my life, but there it is. Learning to recognize and name my emotions instead of burying them has been the hardest and most worthwhile thing I've ever done. Recently, I started volunteering at a youth mentorship program, working with kids who've experienced trauma. One boy reminded me of myself at that age, so determined to be strong that he'd nearly walled himself off from any real connection. Helping him has been helping me too. I'm not writing to disrupt your life or ask for anything. I just wanted to acknowledge the ripple effect your courage has had. You chose authenticity over comfort, truth over compromise. That choice changed my trajectory, and now, perhaps I can pay that forward in some small way. Wishing you continued success, and more importantly, continued joy. James. Olivia set the phone down, surprisingly steady despite the emotions swirling through her. There was no desire to return to what they'd had. That chapter was firmly closed. But there was something profoundly healing in knowing that her painful choice had catalyzed positive change. Not just for herself, but for James as well, she thought. Of the countless people who passed through each other's lives, altering trajectories in ways that might never be fully understood. How the end of one story could be the beginning of another. It's an entirely different one. That evening, as golden light spilled across her small living room, Olivia began sorting through photographs for her next exhibition. This collection would explore healing not as a destination, but as a continual process. With all its messy setbacks and unexpected breakthroughs, among the images was one she'd taken shortly after moving to Seabrook, her own reflection in a tide pool at dawn, her face tear-streaked, but peaceful, the rising sun creating a halo effect around her silhouette. She'd titled it Becoming. The exhibition would open on what would have been her mother's birthday. Patricia would have understood the symmetry in that choice, how endings folded into beginnings, how loss could eventually make space for new forms of love. Olivia selected the tide pool self-portrait as the centerpiece of the collection, then opened her laptop to compose a reply to James. James, thank you for your email. I'm glad to hear about your work with the youth mentorship program. Those children are fortunate to have someone helping them navigate emotions that our culture often teaches them to suppress, especially boys. I have a new exhibition opening next month at the Whidbey Island Art Center. If you're inclined to see it, there will be a preview showing on March 15th. No pressure either way. Life has a strange way of bringing us exactly the lessons we need, doesn't it? Even when they arrive in painful packages. Be well, Olivia. She sent it without overthinking, then returned to her curation. As twilight deepened outside her windows, Olivia felt a sense of completion, not just regarding James, but in the larger arc of her journey. She had not emerged unscathed from the pain of their relationship or her mother's death. There were still days when grief ambushed her, still moments when she questioned her decisions. But she had stopped apologizing for her tears, had reclaimed the right to feel deeply without shame. That night, as she stood on her porch watching stars appear over the ocean, Olivia thought about the message at the heart of her new exhibition. That healing doesn't mean erasing pain, but integrating it, allowing it to deepen our capacity for connection rather than diminishing it. James might attend the preview showing, or he might not. Either way was perfectly fine. They had served their purpose in each other's stories not as the great love affair either had once imagined, but as catalysts for necessary growth. Some lessons could only be learned through loss. Some strengths could only be discovered when everything else fell away. Olivia smiled into the darkness, feeling the cool Pacific breeze against her face. The tears that had once been dismissed as weakness had become her greatest strength both in her art and in her life. They were evidence of her courage to remain open in a world that often rewarded emotional closure. Proof that vulnerability was not the opposite of strength, but its most powerful expression. Tomorrow would bring new photographs to take, new moments, to witness new emotions, to honor, and she would meet them all with her heart wide open. unafraid of the depth of her own feeling, the most valuable legacy her mother had left her, and the truest form of freedom she had claimed for herself.